Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Silverfort. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We've got an exciting presentation ahead, but before we get this thing rolling, we do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First of all, we are recording today's session. So if you'd like to rewatch today's recording at a later point, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. If you'd like to engage with us, and we'd really encourage you to, there's a couple of ways to do so. The first and the easiest way to communicate with us is through the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So if you see that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining us. If you have any specific questions, we do want you to send those to the Q&A tab. Sending your questions to the Q&A helps us keep track of all of your questions, and we do want to address as many as we can. We've got some time set aside at the end to address those, but if any come in that are super timely, we're going to try to get to them as soon as we can. Additionally, if you jump over to the handout section, you'll see there is a downloadable version of the report that we're going to be referencing a lot during our conversation today, so feel free to grab that report. And before we close things out today, we're giving away two $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around to see if you're one of our lucky winners. So our topic today is Way Too Vulnerable, Uncovering the State of Identity Attack Surface. And I'm joined today by Hed Kovitz, CEO and co-founder at Silverfort. So Hed, thank you so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. I'm going to bow out and let you take it from here, but we'll be talking here shortly when we get to the questions.
Great. Thanks, Cody. Really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So today I will be talking a bit about what I think is one of the biggest problems or blind spots of cybersecurity today, which is identity. I think that you all know that identity and credentials have been involved in almost every data breach of the recent years, both as a way to breach into corporate networks with stolen identities, and also as a way to spread, to move laterally inside the environment. And today we're going to talk about a research that we've done across many companies and identity professionals to understand the gaps around identity protection. Where is it missing? How far are the current solutions really implemented? And I hope that it will help everybody here to understand some of your own gaps and challenges when it comes to identity security and the importance of solving these gaps. So just very little about my background. I started my career in cybersecurity in the Israeli intelligence, 8200. Where I was a group leader managing 5 teams doing cyber campaigns. And after that, worked as a product manager for a few companies, mostly did projects for different governments, designed their national cybersecurity infrastructure for a few countries, and then started the Silverfort 7 years ago. And today, again, we're going to focus on this research report that we did together with Osterman Research. Before we dive in, I want to say just a little bit about some of the definitions of the things we're going to talk about. So first of all, the identity attack surface. What is it? We basically refer to all the digital identities, credentials, passwords, all the different resources that can be accessed with these corporate identities. Attacks that target the identity attack surface are ones that use compromised credentials to gain unauthorized access into corporate resources. And securing the identity attack surface really means the ability to detect and prevent these kind of attacks. When we talk about the threats that are related to identity, we talk about things like account takeover, where somebody can compromise your password, your credentials, and then take over your account, your identity, and do things on your behalf. We're also talking about lateral movement and ransomware spread, where an attacker takes a stolen identity and use it in order to move between devices and between servers in the network and take over more and more resources potentially even the entire network. That's what happens in almost every ransomware attack and a lot of data breaches. So we are going to focus today on three elements of the identity attack surface, the three main types of identities. One being privileged users, which are obviously very important. These are the users that have a lot of permissions. And we're going to talk about what I think is the most common way of protecting them today, which is PAM, Privileged Access Management. The second thing is standard users, so just the regular corporate employees, or maybe suppliers or other people that log into the network but don't necessarily have a lot of permissions. The most common method to protect them usually is MFA, multi-factor authentication, to verify that it's really them. And finally, service accounts or non-human identities. These are the machine-to-machine access scenarios where there's not even a human. And then we're talking mostly about discovering, monitoring, and also protecting what these accounts are able to do. The survey that I'm going to show you today is something that we did in order to understand two things. The coverage of these solutions, so how much are they actually implemented within companies today? Not just the fact that they are implemented, but are they fully protecting the environment, all the users, all the resources, or only a small part of them? And we also looked at the confidence, companies' ability to actually stop attacks using these tools and how much they feel like they're able to do that. We used Osterman Research, who's done an amazing job on this research report. And what they did is they surveyed 650 identity professionals. We intentionally focused on identity people, directors of IAM, identity architects, heads of identity and access management, and so on, because we wanted to understand their perspective and not just the perspective of the C-level executives who may think that they have MFA and they have PAM and they are all good. We wanted to talk to the identity people that actually know, are these solutions really fully implemented? Are they actually protecting us? And we've done this across many geographies, many industries, so I think it really represents what's going on today in many companies when it comes to identity security. So let's talk about the highlights of this report. And then when we finish, we'll spend just a few minutes talking about how can we actually solve some of these problems. What can we do to protect the identity attack surface properly? But first, we wanted to just understand what is the current status. So the first question we had was around what identity infrastructure companies are even using. Is it legacy on-prem identity like Active Directory, or is it cloud identity providers like Okta and Microsoft Entra and Ping and OneLogin and others, or is it a combination? And we found that almost every company has a hybrid identity stack. So 82% of companies have both an on-prem directory and a cloud identity provider, and that seems to be very clear across every industry and every geography. I think it's obvious that people have some resources on-prem, they have some cloud applications, and that is important because it means that we need to protect a hybrid identity stack. The reason for that is if an attacker is able to breach into our on-prem Active Directory, they can often use that access to get access also to the cloud identity. We've seen this recently with the data breach on MGM, right? So compromising the on-prem Active Directory and then using that to get to the Okta system and compromise the cloud as well, or the opposite. The next thing that we wanted to know is what is the coverage of MFA? Multi-factor authentication being one of the most basic security controls that you want to implement for identity protection. It's really the first thing you do when you're trying to secure your enterprise and your identities, to make sure that people don't just steal passwords or guess your passwords and take over your accounts. But the thing about MFA is a lot of companies say, yes, we have MFA somewhere, maybe on one application, maybe on a few, maybe on the VPN. And we wanted to know, how broadly is your MFA implemented? Do you really have it across all your sensitive resources? And we looked at things that seem to be missing for many companies, like command line tools, PowerShell, things like that attackers use to bypass MFA. Because when they log in with these kind of tools, they kind of go through the window, right, through the back door, and MFA is not even available there. Things like legacy applications, like IT and OT infrastructure, shared network drives and databases and endpoints and servers and so on. And what we've seen is that the majority of companies protects a relatively small portion of their resources. So they have MFA. If you ask them, do they use MFA? The answer is yes, but only on a few of the applications, which for the attacker doesn't mean much because, again, I can share from my days being on the attacker side. As the attacker, you get to choose how you log in, right? So if you have MFA on remote desktop, but I can still use remote PowerShell to log into the same server, that doesn't really matter to me. The next thing we wanted to know was coverage when it comes to the types of users that are being protected. So are people really protecting all the users with MFA or only the most sensitive ones, maybe their admins, their privileged users only? And we've seen that 2/3 of companies are really protecting only some of their users with MFA. So there are many users that don't even have MFA implemented, which again leaves that same backdoor, that same weak link that the attacker can focus on. 1/3 of the companies actually have MFA on everyone, again, at least for some of the resources. When you correlate this partial coverage with the previous one that I showed, the partial coverage of the users with the partial coverage of the resources, you see that attackers actually have a lot that they can still do with stolen passwords, which is of course concerning. The next thing we wanted to know was around PAM, Privileged Access Management. That is a solution that is notoriously very difficult to implement. And we suspected that a lot of companies, even though they purchased the PAM solution, they are not really successful in implementing it. But we wanted to know where are they in this journey. So we gave them a few options. And what we've seen is that only 10% are actually fully implemented on a PAM solution, 10% of companies across industries and geographies. Another 25% are in the process, but they are on track. They are actually feeling like they're going to be able to achieve it. Maybe it takes a long time, but they feel like they're making progress. But the rest of them either don't have a PAM solution, or they are stuck somewhere in the process. So maybe they are encountering issues, but they're still trying, or maybe they are encountering issues and they actually gave up, right? So 11% of companies actually gave up. That's a bigger percentage than the ones that have PAM fully implemented. So we realized PAM is a very difficult journey. We have also asked companies, do they have a plan? The ones who are struggling, do you have a plan in place in order to solve it? And we've seen that only 26% of companies actually have a plan of how do they going to get to the end of that implementation process. The majority of companies are saying, maybe we know what to do, but we don't have the resources to do it. It's just too complex, which really brought us to the conclusion that some of these identity security solutions, but PAM especially, are just too complicated, too complex, too difficult to implement. And most companies don't even have the time or the resources to even get to the end of that journey. And attackers are taking advantage of that. So again, very alarming when it comes to the situation of our identity attack surface security. The next thing we ask about is even a bigger blind spot, I think, and that's the non-human identities, service accounts. So when it comes to service accounts, we've seen that people don't even have visibility into them. Only 5.7% of companies even have full visibility into all the service accounts that they have in their network. The vast majority of companies don't even know who their service accounts are. So they don't even have a full understanding of all the different service accounts in the network and what they're doing, which I think is very easy to understand. I mean, I understand how they got to this situation because service accounts are usually a mess. Somebody created an application 15 years ago and created a service account for that and never actually documented it. And now it's being reused across 10 other applications and no one even knows about it. And maybe someone in one of the admins is using his personal credentials to run some application or schedule task and never told anyone. and then left the company, and it's just a mess, and people don't even know where these accounts are being used, which is really the first step to even securing them. So we obviously also wanted to talk about protection, but I will not even show you that because even that first step was not even there. By the way, I'm seeing some questions on the Q&A section about, can Silverfort actually determine the coverage, and some of it was around the MFA coverage or the coverage of some of these other solutions. So yes, absolutely, we can see all the different systems, and maybe I'll talk about it later. But I wanted to focus a bit on our findings first, and then I'm happy to spend a few minutes on where we can help. And by the way, I think that I usually prefer to keep these sessions short, so hopefully I'll be able to give you some time back. But let's see. We'll now move to the next thing, which I think is really kind of the bottom line. So with all these security solutions in place or not, do people feel confident in their ability to prevent data breaches that are related to stolen identities, such as initial access with stolen identities or lateral movement in the network? And we've seen that it's only around 20% of people that actually think that they have high confidence. But then some, a good amount of people have medium confidence. Maybe they feel like they have, some protection, which of course is better than none. But overall, it really is clear that people understand identities is a weak link in enterprise security. And when you really dive deep to the details, you see that they understand that a lot of these security controls are really missing there. The next thing that we wanted to know, and this is, here we're talking about confidence, right? But more importantly was, do people actually experienced an identity-related data breach? So we asked, did you actually encounter a breach that was using compromised identities, compromised credentials? And only like 16% didn't have an identity-related data breach. The vast majority of companies have experienced a breach that was using compromised identities, which I think is very clear because we know that the majority of data breaches are using stolen identities. Again, I can go back to my experience being on the other side, and I can tell you that as an attacker, that's kind of the go-to approach, because why should you even bother finding creative ideas of how to breach into the network where you can just take someone's password, which you can easily get to social engineering or to a phishing attack, and you can easily find one person in the company that will somehow reveal their password. And then once you are in, protection is very, very partial. So you can always find some applications and some servers that will just allow you to log in with a password. It's almost too easy. So all of this really brings me to the conclusion that today's organizations are really exposed to a lot of attacks that take advantage of identities. The current solutions really fall short, and I think that it's not because they're not secure enough. I actually think that a lot of these solutions, MFA, PAM, visibility tools, they are great. Like, they're offering great capabilities that every organization needs. I really think that the problem with them is not the level of security that they offer once they're fully implemented. I think that it's the fact that it's too complex, takes too long, and sometimes not even technically possible to implement them with all the different systems in the enterprise. If you think about legacy applications, and some people are still using mainframe, right? And industrial systems and all kind of IT infrastructure components like hypervisors and all kind of backup systems and storage systems and so on. There are a lot of things that are not a simple modern web application where MFA is just not even an option, where visibility is missing. And then when it comes to PAM, to privileged access management, I think that implementation is just very complex. So we looked at all of this, and again, there's a lot more in this report. So I invite you, if you want to see more of the findings, to look at the full report, and we have it here in the handouts section in this webinar, and also I'll show a link at the end if anyone wants to download it from our website. But it's You can see it right now on your screen, I think. And you'll see much more findings there and a lot of interesting analysis of the maturity model of different companies. We did a whole analysis there together with Osterman around the overall maturity of different companies. Now I want to spend just a few minutes before we open it to questions to talk about how can we solve these gaps. So we talked about a lot of issues. I'm sure some of you can see those same issues within your own companies, with identity security solutions being very difficult, very expensive, time-consuming. How do we actually secure the identity attack surface in an easier way without so much resources? And I want to quickly show you what we do. Again, it's not going to be the main focus today, but I want to show you something that is very related to this. And I'll show you just a small part, a small example out of our solution at Silverfort. And this is really the Silverfort platform, what I'm showing you now. Silverfort, in short, is a solution that looks at all the identity infrastructure, both legacy and cloud, and gives you all the necessary security controls, whether it's visibility or enforcement of MFA or conditional access or all kinds of different policies and insights. So with Silverfort, you can see here on this side all the different identity providers that you have: Azure AD, which is now called Entra, Okta, Ping, the old Active Directory, ADFS, Radius, and maybe there are more, with all the different users: privileged users, regular users, service accounts. And on the other side, you see all the different systems, cloud applications, legacy systems, and so on. And here in the middle is our policy engine. So Silverfort can really enforce a policy on anything. Now, the unique thing about Silverfort is really two things that make this solution, I think, very unique in the ecosystem today. One is that we can enforce policies and protection across of all these identity silos, not only on Okta, not only in Azure, not only on the legacy Active Directory, where it was until now missing, but everywhere. So we can add security controls to anything, but I'm going to give you just two examples. One is let's focus on MFA, because we did talk a bit about MFA and the fact that it's missing today. And I'm going to use a very easy example. Let's think about a shared folder. Okay, something that I think we can all agree that there's no way to do MFA for this. So when we talked about the missing coverage of MFA earlier, this is one good example. How do you add MFA into something legacy like a network file share? And with the Silverfort technology, we can basically add MFA to anything. So what I'm getting now, and you'll be able to see this on my phone, is an MFA prompt. I'll show it to you on my camera. And this is with the Azure MFA, so the Microsoft Authenticator. And I'm going to say, yes, this is me. And then what will happen is I'm able to actually log into this shared folder. So basically, we were able to inject modern MFA, and it doesn't have to be the Silverfort MFA, right? It can be any MFA that you can think about. The Azure MFA, the Okta MFA. We also have ours, which is free, but anyone. And the most important part is you can enforce it on anything. So when I'm trying to connect to this system, in the backend, it goes to a directory, like in this case, Active Directory and old identity solution. Active Directory can forward it to Silverfort. This is a unique capability that we developed. And Silverfort can now call the Azure MFA, for example, or any kind of MFA. And only once the MFA is verified, we tell the directory that's okay, you can now release the authentication. I'll give you one other quick example just to make sure it's clear. I'll do the same thing with a command line tool. So I'm going to use PowerShell. And you'll see that the same thing happened now on this another legacy interface that attackers use all the time because it's so easy. And again, I'm getting this MFA push on my phone. And I'm going to say, normally I would do this interactive, but you guys are a lot of people. So let's say no in this case. And what will happen is I will not be able to log in. So we were able, again, to inject MFA into an interface that doesn't even support MFA. There's a lot more here around other type of capabilities. I'll only talk about maybe one more before we move on, because again, the focus here is not on our solution, but I wanted to give you an idea of how we can potentially help. And I'm going to just talk quickly about service accounts, the non-human identities. Service accounts are even a bigger problem sometimes because, again, people don't even know where they are, what they're doing. And what Silverfort does is taking care of that entire journey automatically. You don't even need to do much. Silverfort automatically finds all the service accounts in the network. So we will show you that all of these accounts are behaving like machines. They're looking like a non-human, non-human identities. If I click on one of them, I think you'll be able to see it. So a lot of authentications here that come from kind of the same pattern. And we'll be able to tell you that this account is coming from these sources to these destinations these many times. We will analyze the risk of this account and how predictable it is. So how much is it doing the same thing every time? And then all kinds of other insights about, does it do interactive login? Does it have a lot of privileges? Is it used very broadly? Is it a hybrid account, which is basically is it also used by a human? Maybe one of your admins is using it for his own personal things from time to time, which is not great. And then we are able to enforce a policy automatically and basically tell you, after we understand what this service account is doing, we will be able to protect it and make sure nobody can do anything else with it. So if somebody will try to use this service account outside of going from A to B, we can either alert or even block. So we can make sure that even if somebody knows the password of this account and you cannot rotate it, for example, still nobody will be able to cause damage with it, because even if they find the password, they can only log in from A to B, even if this account has a lot of privileges. So the risk of service accounts becomes much, much lower. They cannot really cause much damage. They can only do what they are intended to do. So this is a little bit, there's a lot more here that I'm not going to spend time on today, but things around insights and hygiene and security posture and detections of different attacks like pass the hash and golden ticket and so on. But I wanted to focus on some of these things that were until now very, very challenging to achieve. So again, we're going to keep it relatively short. So I wanted to give you an overview of what we found in this research and also a little bit of what we can do to help. But now I want to open it to questions. So I invite everyone who has any question about what I showed until now to ask it in the chat or in the Q&A section. And I'll just put on the screen here in the meanwhile, just in case you want to learn more, the report, or also if you want to see a demo. But again, let's open it to questions, and I'm happy to answer anything you have in mind.
Awesome. So that is our first official call out. Send in your questions, everyone. We have received a couple, so let's go ahead and just take them from the top. So how do you explain the low rate of MFA coverage for all these resources?
So I think that one of the biggest issues with MFA is the way it was designed originally was that something that you need to build into your application. So if you have an application or a server, you need to make them support MFA, because right now they're built to receive a password, and you need them to receive multi-factor authentication. So it basically implies that you need to change your application if it's a legacy application, or you need to put an agent on your server, or you need to put a proxy in front of it. You need to do something pretty intrusive. And when you have an enterprise with thousands of servers and applications and endpoints and IoT devices, how are you going to build MFA into each of them? It's not even technically possible sometimes. And I think that organizations have to switch into a more generic solution of just a way to apply MFA anywhere instead of building into every system one by one. I think it's critical. Otherwise, attackers are always going to find the one that doesn't have protection.
Yep, it seems like cybersecurity experts need to have every front covered, but hackers and those with malicious intent just need to find that one missing protection.
Exactly. We've seen a lot of it, by the way. We've been called into some customer environments where there was MFA deployed on thousands of servers. So they actually spent years because some very secure aware companies, and they had, I would not name the vendor, but they had MFA agents on thousands of servers, and they would go through a lot of tests. And then the attacker came in and they just use an alternative access tool. So instead of using remote desktop, they just use PSExec or WMI or Mimikatz, right? Or all kinds of other tools that connect to the same server with the same password, but without going through the front door, through the Windows login screen, and bypass their MFA completely. And the funny thing was, only then they realized that the attacker actually preferred to use these tools, the command line tools. They don't want to go to the Windows login screen. So they were they were annoying the real employees every day without even putting MFA on the things that attackers actually prefer to use when they move laterally in the network. So it's really missing today.
So, what is it about PAM deployment or onboarding that makes it so challenging?
I think that the fact that with traditional PAM, you need to, for every account, you need to find it, understand who is using it, because you're going to change it. You're going to change the password of that account. So you need to understand which applications, which other people are using it, and you need to map all of them and talk to the application owners and make sure nothing's going to break. And then you are changing that password and you're putting it in the vault. It's such a manual, complex process with so much uncertainty, and so many things break, and so many applications stop working, and the friction is just so high that people sometimes do it only for a few accounts, or they do it for many accounts, but over years. It takes them, 2 or 3, and even more years, because it's such a manual process. And I think that when you think about it, if you could add MFA, visibility, conditional access to all these accounts without having to manually find them and modify them and figure out who's using them, if you can just map them automatically, you would save years of work. I think we're at the point where it's not only an advantage there, it's the only way to achieve it, because the traditional approach I think companies have been trying to do for 15 years now, and very few of them are at the end of that journey, which is a bit concerning. It's definitely one of the biggest, most complex projects today.
So what is it about service accounts that makes visibility so hard?
Service accounts, I think, because they were created over the years, and often not being documented, a lot of organizations just have so much history of different accounts that are being used to run all kinds of things that they just don't know about. And the problem is there's not necessarily any pattern for like the naming convention or the group memberships, or even if there's no way of knowing that nobody created an account outside of that, because I can theoretically create an account that is called head, or even use my own personal account to run an application or to run a scheduled task, and nobody will know. We were in a call with a customer where we installed the product, and part of the installation of our own product requires a service account, because our own product requires you to give us a service account so that we can query Active Directory. And we said, okay, we need to create a service account. And they said, and the person said, oh, no problem. Let's just use my own admin account. That's easier. It will save us a lot of time. And we were like, that's what we are here to solve. Like that's the problem that we are here to fight. So how would you do that in this context? But it's just so easy. It's so easy to take your own account and give it to run, some vendor application, instead of going and asking for a dedicated service account. Or even if you did, people forget about it after a while, or they are reusing that account across many applications. It's just such a mess that I really think attackers today see service accounts as their easiest target, because these accounts usually have high privileges. They don't change because nobody wants to break them. Nobody's looking at them because, who knows what they're even doing, and they can just help you take over the network. We've seen this in so many data breaches in the recent years. This is really one of the biggest blind spots today in enterprise security, and I think until now there wasn't really a good answer. So it's one of the things that attracted us to look at it.
Awesome. Well, Head, thank you so much. It looks like we've got through about 35 minutes here, and we have exhausted our questions. So,
Great.
last call for questions for our audience. Head, I do want to pick your brain and just ask you if there is one final thing, if there's one takeaway. So maybe somebody has just joined us, and you've got to summarize this whole presentation as succinctly as you can. What do you think is the most important takeaway?
I think that the most important takeaway is that for a long time, people thought about identity as just part of their IT infrastructure and not necessarily as a huge attack surface. And I think that people understand more and more that identity is maybe the most vulnerable attack surface because it's such a mess, because there's so much technical depth and so much legacy infrastructure there, and so many different silos of identity security that are only covering one application or a few applications or maybe one type of users. It's been such a forgotten attack surface that I think over the years, attackers just got used to focusing on it as kind of the go-to method. And you can see that in even in every red team assessment. I mean, the first thing your red team is doing is, finding some kind of, maybe doing some kind of phishing or something, and then finding some kind of credentials, and then moving across the network with pass the hash, Mimikatz kind of tools, until they get to a domain admin and take over the network. So it's all about identities. It's about finding the credentials, moving throughout the network, using those credentials. Once you remove that from the equations, most of them don't even know what to do. We have customers that are running the red team assessment twice now, once with Silverfort, and then they actually turn us off and run it again just to find other issues, because we found that when you remove that capability from the attacker to actually use identities and legacy authentication protocols to spread through the network, you kind of remove the biggest tool they have today. So I hope people here understand, or at least I hope that this research helps highlight that identity is just a huge gap that was not properly handled, at least not holistically, until now as a security attack surface. So again, really thank you for the invitation today, and I hope it was interesting for the audience here. Again, you can find our research report here or in the handout section, and really appreciate the time today.
Of course. Well, Head, I can't let you go without asking one more question that just came in. Is it sustainable to have a dedicated service account for all applications? And I assume this means a single dedicated service account.
Yeah, I see this question. I actually assumed that what the person meant was, is it sustainable to have a different one for every application? Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but because obviously having one for all the applications is not a good idea. But let's assume that they mean for every application a separate one. I do think that's the best way to do it. I think that today there are automation and DevOps tools that can allow you to actually achieve that. So when you're creating an application, there's a lot of automation you can do to actually create a dedicated account. And we have integrations with these things. We can use actually our APIs or integration with ticketing systems to incorporate Silverfort into your DevOps processes. So when you're creating a service account, you can already register it with Silverfort together with what is the intended purpose of the service account. So it should go from here to there. And then the service accounts are now being born with already a record of what they're supposed to do, where are they supposed to be used. I think it is a great approach. I think the problem is not, is it sustainable, but the problem is that a lot of companies just have years of depth when it comes to like so many accounts where this wasn't the case. And we live in the real world where they can't just remove all of that and create it perfectly from scratch. So we understand that the first step is really discovery of what's going on right now, and then starting to protect those things, because again, we are all struggling with protecting existing networks that are not sterile and nice. They are complex and problematic. But I think that's that's the challenge, and that's what makes it interesting. And I think that we are, as an industry, I think we are making huge progress there.
Well, Head, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you answering our questions and taking us through not only your presentation, but the demo as well. I think everyone is going to take a lot away from today. So once again, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Of course. So just a reminder, today's session was recorded. So if you'd like to rewatch today's session, or if you'd like to share with the rest of your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the Security Boulevard website. That's securityboulevard.com/webinars. And be sure to look in the on-demand section. It will be there in just a couple hours. We do have 2 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing. They are Dana R. and Ibrahim Q. So to Dana and Ibrahim, congratulations. I'll be reaching out to you via email here shortly to get you these gift cards. If you don't see an email from me, check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. I'd like to thank Silverfort for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who's joined us, thank you so much for being here. At the top of the chat, there is a link, but if you also stick around, you'll be funneled to that link. It's just to our survey, and we would love to hear your feedback, whether it's about today's program or upcoming topics. Please let us know your thoughts there, and we'd love to bring it into our processes. So once again, Head, thank you. To everyone here, thank you so much. You may now disconnect.
Thank you very much.